Hi everyone, my name is Alexandra Hudson. I'm the author of The Soul of Civility, Timeless Principles to Heal Society and Ourselves. And my book and this project, Civic Renaissance, explores the most important question of our day. How do we flourish across deep difference? And Civic Renaissance is a community of co-creators who are dedicated to that essential work now, starting with ourselves. And honored to have you here. If you're new here, welcome. Please sit down, grab a drink, stay a while. We're grateful you're here. My family and I are going to Japan this weekend, and I wanted to offer some reflections on how this work and some of my ideas apply to a totally different culture than what I was raised in, than what I know. That's very much why we're going. There are some, institutions interested in these ideas, which is very exciting. And also, if you know people or institutions in Japan who could be interested in this work of how to flourish across difference and the work of Civic Renaissance and the Soul of Civility, please reply to this email, reach out to me, make an introduction. I would love to meet them while we're over there for 2 weeks in March. So we've been preparing for this trip, getting ready to read the kids The Tale of Genji this week. We recently watched Shogun, the mini series. I think it's Hulu, and it was a really beautiful and interesting immersion into Japanese culture. And again, that's a really important reason why I wanted to go. We've long admired Japanese aesthetics, cuisine, history, tradition, and I wanted something totally different. I wanted just a really steep learning curve, and I wanted to be challenged and elevated. So that's why I've always loved to travel. And I encourage you to travel as well, and stay tuned for some announcements about some opportunities to maybe even travel together coming in the coming months. Anyway, excited for this trip. We've been preparing, and I wanted to share a few reflections about just from some of the early research and reading that we've done, and just, enjoying Japanese cinema. We do have a few other films coming up on our list this week that I'll share with you some reflection on. So Japan is widely thought of as one of the most polite societies in the world. It is incredibly tight-knit. It is coherent. And I'm really interested to discover when I'm there how this core distinction in my work, the difference between civility and politeness, how does that apply in a culture, an extremely polite culture like Japan? So for example, in my work, I describe civility. Politeness is manners, it's etiquette, it's technique, it's external stuff. It's what we do, it's what we say. And Japan is very, very good at that. Civility, by contrast, is an inner disposition of the heart. It's a way of seeing others fundamentally as our moral equals, worthy of a bare minimum of respect, just by virtue of our shared equal moral worth as human beings. And we are each owed, and owe to others, a bare minimum of respect by virtue of our shared personhood, full stop. And sometimes actually respecting others requires being impolite, telling a hard truth, engaging in robust debate. So there are two insights I wanted to share with you, and they're kind of like working hypotheses. And they're not at all to cast aspersions on a foreign culture, not at all. I adore and respect the Japanese culture, and I'm so fascinated to learn from it and be formed by it. But just kind of going in there and testing out how this distinction between civility and politeness, how could this serve Japanese culture? That's kind of my experiment. And so just from, watching Shogun and some early, reading and knowledge and rudimentary knowledge about Japanese culture, here are just a few ideas. So there is this one insight about one exchange in the show Shogun that I thought was really emblematic of how they are polite as a society, and they emphasize, like we do in the West, they emphasize politeness, and they settle for the mere form and technique of doing the perfectly correct thing, and they insufficiently cultivate civility. the inner disposition of the heart, a way of seeing others as our moral equals. And again, I'm not saying Japan does this uniquely. This is exactly why I wrote this book for our culture as well. And so there's this one line in the show where a woman, a protagonist, is talking to the main character, and she says to him, do not be fooled. And the premise of the show, I should say, it's an Englishman. They call him an Englishman. They call him a pirate. They call him a barbarian. Washes up on the shore of Japan, and all of a sudden he becomes this pawn of politics between these top leaders of the Japanese council. It's ruled by this council of 5 Japanese gentlemen, and there's this kind of infighting. They're trying to gang up on one of them, and one of them is just incredible, kind of like a Yoda, very wise, very savvy, very prudent figure. And so anyway, that's just kind of the premise. And there's also dynamics because the Portuguese have been in Japan for centuries, or I can't remember exactly how long, and they have really established trade roots and relationships within Japan, but also layered on top of that is the Christian faith, the Catholic Christian faith. And so the Englishman is skeptical of all things Portuguese because England and Portugal are at war, and they think that Portugal is exploiting Japan, and they have like a monopoly, which they do. So they're kind of like 3 of those cultural factions intermingled here. Anyway, the barbarian, they call him the Anjin, it becomes very close and befriends this young Japanese woman who has just seen an unbelievable amount of sadness and horrors in her life. And, she's someone who, out of loyalty to her leader, goes about doing her duty of serving this barbarian, the Anjin, but inwardly she literally wants to die. She wants to end her life, but is forbidden by her husband. So she says this phrase to him, which I thought was really poignant. She says, "Don't be fooled by our politeness, our bows, or our maze of rituals. Beneath it all, we could be very far away, alone." And I thought that was so interesting because it's true, that illuminates how in a very polite and tight and close-knit culture like Japan, politeness is really, really important. Doing the correct thing is more important than feeling correctly. And that this line shares that someone could be outwardly, polite, but inwardly, resenting your very existence, which is what this woman was doing to the Anjin, at least initially. I won't spoil it for you, but there is a little bit of a steamy love dynamic. So, there was that insight, and then there was another. So just that insight about how a society too often, as a society, we can too often settle for mere politeness when we should instead aim for, doing and saying the correct thing, when we should instead aim for true civility. So another insight was a little vignette with this gentleman. He had a gardener as part. He's kind of elevated from being this barbarian and kind of prisoner of war who's washed up on shore to being a very high level, very well respected kind of status because of one of the Japanese leaders in the show. So all of a sudden he has his own staff, he has a home, he has a gardener, and he goes out hunting one day and brings home a pheasant or something, maybe a rabbit, and hangs it. And it's some sort of English ritual that just to let it hang. And it goes on for weeks, and everyone can't stand it. And he says to his community, he says, "Don't touch this. Like anyone who," and this is in broken Japanese, "anyone who touches this, go like that," as like a signal, like don't do it. Anyway, after the stench is so bad, this poor gardener says, "I can't take it anymore. This is like a public nuisance." So he takes down the pheasant or wild beast that was hunted because it's driving everyone mad and it has flies and it's really gross. And then, because he's disobeyed his master's orders, he's put to death. And the Anjin, the Englishman, is absolutely horrified by this. He says, "How could you even think that that's what I wanted? Like don't do exactly what I say. Do it like do the spirit of what I would actually want. And he says, do you guys have no value of human life here? And it's so interesting. They care more about the rules, care more about propriety, care more about hierarchy. If a superior says, don't do this, and you do it, you die. You know, like that's just, you know, the cult. Of course, this is like medieval Japan. But still, I thought that was really interesting. Another vignette that was really provocative. I actually started watching the show when I was about a month postpartum, like last year with our third child, Sebastian. And I had to stop watching it because the first episode, it had a vignette of, there's like this big meeting of council, high-level political people, and someone speaks out of turn. They speak or they, disagree when they shouldn't. They didn't have the authority to do so. A kind of mid-level samurai. And because he's done that, he has to commit seppuku. He has to kill himself. He has to die. But not just him. So does his 1-year-old baby. That's just the culture. That because of a father's mistake, the father must die and his line must end because of one impropriety, one rule that was broken. And I mean, this poor mother who had to watch her husband and her baby, her like basically newborn, die. And the rest of the show, she's like very, of course, haunted by this and carries both of their ashes until at the end she's able to, release and let go of that unconscionable grief. So that was an interesting vignette that eliminates, just this fixation on doing the perfectly correct thing, even if it's maybe not the right thing, the just thing. Like nobody, even the town, they were grieving the fact that the gardener had died, but they said, no, it had to happen because he disobeyed the master. And one final thing, observational share. And again, this is all in the spirit of like testing a hypothesis, how I'm going to learn a lot while I'm over there. I'm going to share with you all that I'm learning. And again, if you know people, fascinating people or institutions, have any connections to Japan, please do connect us. I really want to learn. I'd like to go to a Japanese school. I want to learn more about sake and want to make sushi. I want to do all of it. But, one other realization I had is that, because Japan is even such a polite society, both in medieval, shogunate Japan, but also now, that they do have a challenge speaking up in the face of injustice, even today, where things can be let go, or looked at, swept under the rug, as opposed to grappled with. And I mean, Japan is a democracy. Like, civility is a habit and a duty of democracy. As I argue, politeness comes from the Latin polire, which means to smooth or polish, and that's what politeness is and does. Whereas civility is an inner disposition of the heart. It comes from, it's not just external, it's interior orientation to others and ourselves that respects others enough to disagree. And it comes from the Latin civitas, which is our root for civilization, citizen. And that's what civility is. It is a duty of us as citizens, especially in a democracy, to disagree. Disagreement is the lifeblood of democracy. And so it is a problem if you're too fixated on being polite and ritual that you're not able to have those disagreements. And our problem in the West is probably more so disagreeing in ways that dehumanize one another. You're a horrible person and you are, because you disagree with me. But we do still have that challenge of that threat to democracy of avoiding difference entirely, avoiding disagreement entirely, because we're afraid of it. We don't want to offend. We don't want to risk hurting people's feelings. But that is what my book is about how to disagree well, how to disagree with grace, how to disagree bearing the dignity, the inherent equal moral worth of the other front of mind. That means I'm going to respect myself enough, my equal dignity and moral worth, respect myself enough to speak up if I have a concern or if I disagree with you. That means having, enough enough sense of self-respect to do that. And I'm going to respect you enough to not patronize you, not sweep a difference under the rug, but to grapple with difference head on. That is what civility requires of us. And so those are a few of my working kind of hypotheses and theories. What are some other ones? What are some other kind of questions? If you've read my book, what would you like me to see, test, and explore and expand on here in one of these monologues? Another one of these videos, I will explore ritual and table manners and the changeability of norms, and how that maps onto the distinction between civility and politeness. And, norm comes from this, phrase normative as an ideal. But is there an ideal when it comes to social norms, or are they historically, culturally changeable and separate from, morality and actual normativity? So much more to come. I am going to Japan for myself, but also for you to have new intellectual fodder, subject matter to grapple with and share with you. I consider you my intellectual sparring partners. I certainly consider many of you, especially the Civic Renaissance ambassadors among you, to be my co-creators. And if you have not already applied to be a Civic Renaissance ambassador, I invite you to. This is the program I built to partner with leaders who have said, I've read your book and now I want to live it. What do I do now? And this is the invitation to you to apply to become a Civic Renaissance ambassador, join this global community of people like you around the world who want to start a Civic Renaissance right where they are. So really grateful you're here, and more to come. And send me all your Japan recommendations, introductions, connections. Talk soon.